By 1950, Britain owned barely 2 million cars. By decade's end, that number had nearly doubled, and the reason wasn't luck, it was ambition. Factories that had built tanks and Spitfires now built saloons for terrace streets, and ordinary families who had never dreamed of ownership suddenly found a car parked outside the front door. Some of these cars didn't just sell well, they rewrote what Britain believed was possible, breaking records that stood for years. 10 of them changed the road forever. And the car at number 1 didn't just sell in extraordinary numbers. It changed what British car meant, permanently. Number 10. Austin A30 and A35. Picture Longbridge in 1951, workers assembling a car small enough to park almost anywhere, yet roomy enough for a young family's weekend escape. That was the Austin A30, later A35, Britain's answer to a nation still counting pennies after the war. Perfectly pitched into early 1950s Britain, battling the crippling costs of war but looking forward to a better future, it was the ideal transport for a young family, returning 50 to 60 miles per gallon, a figure rarely beaten even now. Its overhead valve engine felt genuinely modern, and its monocoque construction was ahead of many rivals. But the real story was arithmetic. Together the two models topped 500,000 sales, proving that small didn't mean unwanted. For a generation raised on rationing books, this was often the first car they'd ever owned outright. It settled a question British manufacturers had been nervously asking. Could a genuinely small car survive commercially? The answer, it turned out, would shape almost everything that followed it onto Britain's driveways. Number 9. Ford Popular and Anglia 100e. Dagenham had an even blunter answer waiting for that exact question. Launched at a time when affordable new vehicles were scarce, the Ford Popular offered basic, no-frills motoring focused on reliability and low running costs, becoming one of the most accessible cars for the average British family or first-time driver. It wasn't glamorous. Its side-valve engine and vacuum wipers already felt old-fashioned by the mid-1950s. But that was precisely the point. The car proved successful because, on paper, it looked like a sensible alternative to a clean used car, yet in practice there were almost no clean used cars available in post-war Britain, thanks to years of halted production. For thousands of families, the Popular wasn't a compromise. It was the only realistic route into car ownership. Meanwhile its stablemate, the Anglia 100e, brought Ford's first flush, straight bodywork to British roads, quietly modernizing the brand beneath the bonnet's old engine. Between them, these unglamorous little Fords proved something the industry hadn't fully grasped. Britain didn't just want new cars. It was desperate for them, in almost any form. Number 8. Hillman Minx. Desperation, though, wasn't the whole story. Some buyers wanted something with a touch of American swagger, and Roots had exactly that answer. In 1950, imported Hillmans and Austins together sold around 9,000 cars in the United States, and Roots even set up its own New York distribution headquarters, becoming an early adopter of television advertising. At home, the Minx became Roots' bread and butter, styled with rounded, transatlantic curves that made contemporaries look conservative by comparison. By the mid-1950s the Zodiac series Minx, shaped with Raymond Lois design influence, remained by far the group's bestseller. Saloon, convertible, and later estate versions meant there was a Minx for almost every British household, from company representatives to holidaying families. It wasn't the fastest, nor the cheapest, but it struck a balance between affordability and aspiration that resonated deeply. And that balancing act was about to be attempted on a much grander scale, by a manufacturer determined to bring genuine transatlantic engineering to Britain's family car market. Number 7. Ford Consul, Zephyr, and Zodiac. Ford wasn't finished chasing that balance either. In 1950 it unveiled something Britain hadn't quite seen before. With their full-width pontoon styling and unitary construction, these were not only the first modern British Fords, but also Dagenham's first new post-war models and templates for everything that followed. Most significantly, the range featured McPherson strut front suspension and fully hydraulic brakes, a genuinely advanced technical package for a 1950s Ford, wrapped in slab-sided styling that was very American in appearance, just as British buyers wanted. The 4-cylinder Consul offered practicality, while the 6-cylinder Zephyr and luxurious Zodiac gave status-hungry families something to aspire toward. Around 227,732 Consuls alone rolled off the line, marking the start of Ford of Britain's successful attack on the family saloon car market. This wasn't just a sales success. It was proof that Britain could build genuinely modern engineering without importing it. And with that confidence established, one of Ford's own earlier models was quietly racking up numbers that would eventually dwarf almost everything else in the range. Number 6. Ford Prefect. An unassuming name borrowed from school monitors sat behind one of Britain's most dependable family saloons. Introduced before the war and returning to production in 1945, the Prefect built 41,486 units before 1941 and a further 158,007 between 1945 and 1948 alone, and it kept selling steadily right through the following decade. With its robust construction, simple mechanics and affordable price point, the Prefect became a dependable choice for families and small businesses across Britain, often serving as a first car for those stepping up from motorcycles or as modest company transport. In 1953 it was reborn with modern 3-box styling, shedding its old-fashioned upright look while keeping the reliability that had made it a fixture on British roads. For an entire generation of small business owners and growing families, the Prefect wasn't exciting. It was simply always there, dependable and unremarkable in exactly the way post-war Britain needed. But dependability alone wasn't enough to shatter records. Somewhere else in the country, a very different kind of ambition was quietly reshaping an entire manufacturer's fortunes. Number 5. Standard 8 and 10. Standard's approach, by contrast, was refreshingly honest. The Standard 8 arrived as one of the cheapest new cars in Britain, deliberately stripped of frills, aimed squarely at buyers for whom a used car was still the only realistic option. It worked. Reliable, simple, and inexpensive to run, the 8 and its slightly more refined 10 sibling became genuine fixtures of suburban Britain, chosen by families who valued dependability over glamour. Standard's factories expanded production steadily through the decade to keep pace with demand, proof that unpretentious engineering could still shift enormous numbers. For countless first-time buyers, these were the cars that finally made ownership possible, not aspirational, but achievable. Yet even as Standard proved that simplicity sold, a manufacturer in Luton was quietly assembling a much larger success story, one built not around austerity, but around a family car range that would eventually outsell nearly everything else in its class. Number 4. Austin A40 Somerset and Cambridge. Austin, meanwhile, never stopped reinventing its middle market range. The Somerset, built at Longbridge from 1952, brought a 1.2-litre engine and genuine 4-door practicality to Middle Britain. It sold strongly enough that Austin quickly developed a successor, the Cambridge, refining comfort and styling while keeping the formula that had worked so well. Together these cars became familiar sights on suburban roads, chosen by families moving up from smaller Austins as their circumstances improved. They represented something quietly powerful, upward mobility made visible on 4 wheels. A family that had started with an A30 could realistically graduate to an A40 within the same decade, and thousands did exactly that. This wasn't just sales volume. It was evidence of an entire nation climbing steadily out of austerity, one car purchase at a time. But at Luton, Vauxhall was about to prove that mid-market ambition could scale even further, with 2 cars that would each set records of their own. Number 3. Vauxhall Wyvern and Velox. Vauxhall answered that same appetite from Luton, borrowing General Motors' transatlantic design language and applying it to distinctly British price points. The Wyvern, Vauxhall's first genuinely new post-war model, started production in September 1948, with many examples exported to help the British economy, and its later E-Series generation alone found 110,588 buyers. The Velox offered 6-cylinder comfort for families wanting something more substantial, sharing much of the Wyvern's engineering beneath its bonnet. When the redesigned Wyvern and Velox launched in August 1951, they were so well received that initial demand outstripped what the Luton factory could actually supply. Their rounded, American-inspired bodywork stood out on streets still dominated by upright, pre-war silhouettes, and buyers noticed immediately. Between both models, well over 250,000 cars found homes on Britain's roads. But remarkably, Vauxhall's next car wouldn't just match that achievement. It would obliterate it, becoming something this list hasn't seen yet, a genuine national sales record. Number 2. Vauxhall Victor. Launched in February 1957, the Vauxhall Victor wore styling lifted almost shamelessly from the 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air. With 390,747 built in less than 4 years, it became the most popular Vauxhall ever made, outselling the outgoing Wyvern by more than 3-1. It was the first British Vauxhall designed from the outset to be exported in serious numbers, reaching Canada, Australia, the United States, South Africa, and the Caribbean, filling spare General Motors dealer capacity across the Atlantic. For a period, the Victor briefly became Britain's most exported car outright. Sold through Pontiac showrooms in America and under the Envoy name in Canada, it carried British engineering further than almost any family saloon before it. This was genuinely record-shattering, not just at home, but on a global stage few British manufacturers had reached. And yet, however impressive the Victor's numbers were, one earlier, humbler car had already achieved something even the Victor couldn't touch. It hadn't just broken a record. It had created an entirely new category of achievement. Number 1. Morris Minor. Designed under Alec Isigonis and launched at the Earl's Court Motor Show in October 1948, the Morris Minor became the car that defined an entire generation of British motoring. Isigonis considered it a vehicle combining the luxuries of a good motor car with a price suited to the working classes, and it excelled against rivals with genuinely superior handling and cornering. In February 1961, it became the first British car ever to sell more than 1 million units, a feat achieved in less than 13 years, cementing its place as one of the most successful UK-built cars of all time. For families across Britain, owning a Minor wasn't just transport. It was proof that the post-war promise of a better life had actually arrived, parked outside a terraced house that had never known car ownership before. It carried families to seaside holidays, children to school, workers to factories that built it. No British car before it had achieved that scale, and few since have mattered quite so much. This was the car that changed Britain forever. 10 cars, 1 decade, and a country transformed. Britain in 1950 was still rationed, still rebuilding, still uncertain what recovery would actually look like. By 1960, ordinary families owned cars their parents could never have imagined affording. That shift didn't happen by accident. It happened because these 10 machines, from humble prefects to record-breaking miners, gave people something to work toward and, eventually, something to be proud of. Which of these would you have chosen for your own driveway? Tell us below, and let us know which 1950s British car you still remember seeing parked outside your childhood home.